And the week of the church wedding, he actually called off the wedding.
I just really felt like the rug had been pulled from under my feet, and I just felt very lost. I think it was the first time I started having panic attacks.
My pastor said, we prayed together, and he said to me, what you're not going to do is beg someone to love you. And I think that for me was like, oh no, I'm not begging. But I was, because someone told me, I don't want to be with you. But I'm like, oh yeah, you're going to change your mind tomorrow.
Thank you so much for being a part of our growing community. It honestly is just such an honour and such a dream to see how Magnify is growing. For anyone who's new to our channel, Magnify is a network, community and platform focused on empowering ambitious women of faith to thrive in our various spheres of influence.
And we know how important it is to have safe, honest, authentic conversations as women of faith. And so we want to provide a space to do that.
My name is Ruth and I'm the founder and CEO of Magnify.
And my name's Rachel and I'm part of Team Magnify. We'll be your hosts and we'll also be featuring guests each time.
So if you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe, and most importantly, share with a friend who you think would benefit.
Sarah Alonge is a speaker, author, business owner, and ordained minister. Professionally, she works as a global diversity and inclusion manager at a top 100 law firm. Sarah is passionate about raising influencers of faith in the corporate, public, and charity sector. Jennifer Lee Moon has spent the past 2 decades in the entertainment industry, modeling, acting in feature films, TV, and presenting. And she has recently released a clothing line for streetwear with a Christian message called Made in His Image. Jennifer and Sarah have both gone through heartbreak of a long-term relationship breaking down. Having taken time to reflect and grow, we're honoured to have them today to speak about the emotional and spiritual impact and the reality of healing and forgiveness. Today's big topic, we're talking about what do you do when a relationship you thought was for life ends? And we know, of course, this is huge for our community, especially for you both with your story, which we'll hear. We want to be able to heal from that, but also understand the grief and the pain that that can cause. And I would hope ultimately as women of faith, we can find hope at the other side. But we don't just want to rush to that. We want to hear what are the realities and what is the authentic conversation we can have around processing that, because it's huge. And so thank you so much both for being with us. Sarah, first of all, I would love to hear, could you just tell us some of your experience and story in relation to a relationship ending?
So I was in a relationship for 6 years. We met, I think I was like 19 when we met. We got engaged when I was about 23. And we were due to get married. So we actually got legally married. And we had our church wedding. And the week of the church wedding, he actually called off the wedding. So called off the church. At that point, it was very much a shock. I think now kind of looking on, you kind of realize that actually was it a shock? But at the time, it was definitely a shock. It was going to be like a big Nigerian wedding. So I'm Nigerian. They had the family fly down from Nigeria, from America, all for this massive occasion. So when he called to say, you know what, I don't think we can go ahead with this, at that point, naive me at 25 was like, well, maybe it's just for now. Like, it doesn't matter that we spent tens of thousands of pounds. Like, maybe it's just now, right? But then actually about 4 weeks later, he actually said, yeah, no, he doesn't want to carry on with the relationship. So I actually heard from his lawyer to say that he wants to file for an annulment because the time frame for when we had the legal marriage, it was still quite a short time, so we could legally annul it. Needless to say, I was devastated. But then plot twist, he changed his mind. But at that point, I think the rejection and the reality of it, when you want something so badly. So I was like praying, I was like, God, please, he'll change his mind. And then when he eventually did, I think God had brought me to a point where I was okay I realized that I deserve better. Like, you don't just end a 6-year relationship without a conversation, without counseling, without trying, right? And so in doing so, it meant that the next 2 years of my life was literally going to be hell. Like, we couldn't annul anything. We couldn't end anything because I guess the ball was in his court. Until eventually one day we had a breakthrough. And 2 years after the date, we were legally annulled, I think, in 2018. And yeah, that's just an overview.
Yeah. Jennifer, what about you? What's been your experience?
My experience was I got married. I met my ex-husband about 10 years ago. So I think I was in a moment where I just been through a crazy few years and I was just kind of really looking for God. I actually walked into a church and he was one of the pastors. So he kind of took me under his wing. If I'm honest, I think I was probably looking for God, but I kind of settled for a man of God. He was 11 years older than me. He just seemed really mature and stable and really different to all of the past relationships that I'd had. So it felt like this was the right thing to do. So he asked me to marry him a year later. We got married a year later. And then through just so many things, like from the moment we got married, he got incredibly sick. And the dynamic of the relationship completely changed. So it was a really uphill battle. I think I knew the relationship was over, but was very much in denial and just trying to make it work because we made a vow before God, right? So we did try. We had a lot of counseling. He was in the process of wanting to leave his job. It was a very toxic environment for him. So we found something in America. We found a job in Atlanta that we were going to work on together. It was quite exciting. And I think we thought that was going to be our kind of like, we're getting out of this toxic environment. It's going to be a new start. And then around Christmas time, he was like, I'm going without you, which I didn't actually believe at the time. I was like, oh, he's just going through stuff. It's so funny. The people that we were meant to be working for was even like, don't worry. Like once he gets out there, he will realize this is a crazy mistake. But I never actually heard from him again. So I think his mum gave my mum like his lawyer's details and asked me to file for divorce. But yeah, pretty much got ghosted. Not heard from him since.
So for you, Jennifer, was the end of your relationship, was it gradual? Was there a particular moment where you knew it was over?
Yeah, I feel like I knew it was over pretty much the moment we lost trust in each other, but we both kept trying to make it work. So there was still hope. And I think I carried that hope on even after he had left the country. I think there was part of me that was still, got to work this out. Like I was looking on YouTube at all of these like restoration videos. I think there was a moment for me, actually, I was praying with a friend and she was just like, I think you might have to bury this. And I was like, say that? Like, you're destroying hope. But I think that was the moment when I actually, if I was being honest with myself, I was like, no, this has died. Yeah.
So Sarah, obviously your husband had decided that it was over, but then, like you said, there was a plot twist and there was a change of mind.
Yeah.
So for you, where did you feel the end was? Was that gradual, or had the end been for you when he decided at that point, like, this isn't going to happen?
So I was in denial. So when he first said, like, oh, it's the end of the relationship, I was like, okay, that's nice. I was very much like, yeah, no, it's not going to be like the case. And it's so similar to you. I prayed with my friend. I prayed with my pastor. My pastor said, we prayed together and he said to me, what you're not going to do is beg someone to love you. And I think that for me was like, oh no, I'm not begging. But I was, because someone told me, I don't want to be with you. But I'm like, oh yeah, you're going to change your mind tomorrow. And I think just during prayer and just having that kind of counsel, I eventually let go. So I was still wearing my ring and I was on the tube. I'll never forget, I was going to work, Chancery Lane Station, and I prayed. I was like, God, like, I'm going to take this ring off. And right, not even trying to be spooky, I was like, and I want the tan line to go, like, because I had a tan line there. And I took it off and I looked down and I kid you not, there was no tan line. And I was like, okay. And I'd been wearing that ring for, at that point, I think it was about 18 months. So I'm used to wearing it. So even not having it on my finger was really, really naked. But I think just going through that entire day, and it was the first day since we got engaged, for when we got engaged, that finger was naked. Like even to clean it, I was like, okay, clean it now so I can put it back on. And during the whole day without that ring, I think that was the day I realized that actually I've lived 25 years without this ring, right? I can live like without his ring. So that was when it kind of was acceptance for me.
Yeah. And bar shock, obviously, what were some of the initial emotions you were dealing with around that time where it had ended? Because of course, like you were in total shock.
Yeah.
But that must have had a ripple effect
Yeah.
onto other things
Oh,
as well.
absolutely. The biggest was definitely rejection. Like I felt as if like my best friend, because more than anything, we were really good friends, like even before we got together. And so for me, it was like, wow, like my best friend can do this. And I just felt like the trust had gone. I felt rejected. And I honestly, if I'm being honest with you, I felt let down by God and his family too, because I was really close to his family. And it's so weird when you're speaking about like his mum, because I said, he called it off the week off, but it was his mum who called me to tell me. And she didn't even call me, she sent me a text message. And you can just imagine, like, I was like, I've been your daughter for all of this time, and you're sending your daughter a text message literally 6 days before the wedding to say, yeah, this isn't happening. So, yeah, there was a lot of emotions. And unfortunately, it just kept getting worse before it got better.
Yeah. Jennifer, how about you? Like in that time of your husband leaving and just saying that he was going without you, and you're kind of like in disbelief, like, I don't really believe this is a thing. He's just not well. What kind of emotions were you going through, even as he actually physically left as well?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that was a big one. Yeah, because I remember it was around Christmas. It took me a long time to like Christmas again. I was like, I hate Christmas. Abandonment was definitely a big one. I felt very lost because everything in my life had been shaped around him at that time. So my church community, the job that I was doing at the time was in order to kind of like move us into this place, my whole plans. So I just really felt like the rug had been pulled from under my feet, and I just felt very lost. I think it was the first time I started having panic attacks. I remember my first panic attack, I thought I was dying. I was like, I can't breathe. I don't know what's happening. So yeah, a huge amount of stress. I felt like my whole nervous system was like just fried around that time.
Yeah. And you said obviously you felt abandoned. In terms of your relationship with God at that time, what was like the most pressing question you had for God? Because, like these, we're talking about people we love, who we believe we're going to be with forever, have left us. And I'm not trying to say that's the same as our relationship with God, but it automatically puts us in a position of women as women of faith where we question, God, what's going on? Like, what was the most pressing question you had for God at that time?
I think I felt so broken at that time. I wasn't sure if I was going to survive it. So I think that my main question really was, I knew God still loved me. But I was like, but can he still use me if I'm broken? Can he still use me if I've failed him? Like, can he still use me if, this wasn't meant to be my story? So I think it was really do I still have value? Was probably the biggest question.
And did you said that you were asking, could God still use you if you failed him? Is that how you felt from the perspective of the marriage ending?
Yeah. I think I had a real perception at that time that in order to be of value and to be useful, you had to be successful. And I think at that time I was like, well, I failed miserably. I was like, you make a vow before God, and I think people don't, it's not just like a high school breakup, and they can be painful, right? It's like this deep, the only way I think I can describe it to someone who hasn't gone through a divorce is it's like a suicide of the heart. It's like, it feels like a death. It feels like you're watching your house burn down, but then also realizing that you had a part to play in the house burning down. And that's probably, one of the hardest griefs I've experienced personally.
Well, you, Sarah, what were the questions?
Just even adding on to that point, right? like heartbreak is that thing that no one can tell you when you're going to be okay. So you break a leg and the doctor says, okay, 6 weeks, cast comes off, right? Heartbreak, you just don't know. And you don't know at what point another layer's going to come off and you have to heal from that as well. And I think my saving grace, if I'm being honest, is I was denied to the point of delusion, right? Like that's how much I wanted it to work. So me and God were like besties. And I would almost say like I was trying to create the outcome I wanted through prayer. And not necessarily what was supposed to happen. So I was just always praying. So it took a really long time for me to have that moment with God, like, do you know what? Like, I kind of felt let down. And it's worse when the person is also someone of faith. Like if it wasn't, it's kind of like, okay, maybe he doesn't get it. But when you both have been in the faith, you both serve, and I'm not saying that your relationship is your reward. I'm not saying that at all, but you almost feel as if maybe I should have like got a heads up or something. Yeah. So initially I didn't have many questions for God, but then later on is when the questions kind of came in. Yeah.
Yeah. And what's like the most difficult thing you've had to accept going through this? Because we're going to talk a bit to healing and things like that. But in that situation, what for you was the most difficult thing you accepted through the situation?
That it wasn't just him. Like taking full ownership of the fact that it wasn't just him. And it didn't have to get as far as it got to. If I'm being honest, I held on so tightly to the prospects of what we could be and how much I loved him and just even being accepted for who I am and what I stand for, that actually there were times where he was clearly saying to me, I don't know. And I just wasn't hearing it. And I think it also comes with, and I'll be honest, it comes with a form of, I don't want to say desperation, but when you've dealt with certain things in your own life and you find a man who's going to love you faithfully and you've experienced infidelity in your family, right? Or you've like been the friend that you like a guy and then he tells you he likes your friend. And then you meet a guy who doesn't like your friend, he likes you. So there's so much in it that I didn't deal with my own personal traumas or personal issues, and I ran into this relationship. To be fair, I didn't run into the relationship came to me, but then I wasn't ready because there were things that I hadn't unpacked, and I thought the relationship would be the answer. So accepting that, no, actually, Sarah, like you have a part to play in this too, was big, but more so what the part was.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to
It's really hard.
accept.
Yeah, it's really hard.
How about you, Jennifer, in your story, your situation? What's been one of the most difficult things going through that time that you've had to accept? Whether it was about the situation or your future or your part to play, like.
Yeah, I think definitely you've had part to play, like the house burning down may have had something to do with you. That was definitely one of the hardest things to grasp. But also that this was my story. I was like, this wasn't meant to be. Like my testimony was, I went through a rough patch, came back to God, and then everything was just like, it got better. It wasn't all then meant to fall apart. This wasn't meant to be the worst part. So I think realizing that this was my story. It was, I think I really struggled with that for a while.
Yeah, and the impact you said as well, because you were so involved in your church community too, clearly went further beyond your marriage and must have impacted friendships, family relationships, like
everything.
Can you tell us about that? Because that's huge when you're in the middle of such a kind of a close-knit community like that, and there's people that you love that become sometimes casualties in that as well.
That was one of the hardest things, I think. I mean, I'd lost my husband, lost my home, lost my job. But then I felt like church was the place where you'd think you could run to, you'd think the community, but he was a pastor. So that was also his workplace. So every Sunday me going there was like, I was going to where he worked. I was around his colleagues and his friends. And I think, I can't judge them because looking back, they probably felt put in a really awkward situation, but the people that would save me a seat on Sunday didn't want to sit with me anymore. There was a real people not knowing what sides to take and if there was a side to take. And I think, yeah, it was really difficult. I remember walking into church and the people that welcome you into church were in his team and they all just like didn't say anything. I was like, what is going on? Like, what are they thinking? And that's another thing, right? People would jump to assumptions, make up narratives in their mind. And I think if there's one thing I've been set free of, it's caring about what people think. It's like the fear of man's opinion, because the minute that people have made you a villain when you're actually going through one of the hardest things you've ever gone through, because they just don't know, just lack of understanding or whatever. Yeah, that was really hard. It felt very lonely at that time.
Yeah. So who did you turn to at that time? Like where did you go to for support and just some stability in a time that for you was completely earth-shattering, actually?
I had a couple of really good friends, but they were also going through some stuff themselves at the time. It was, for me, a moment when I really had to press into God. I did. I just had to really realize that he's the only one that's really, his love is unconditional and constant. Yeah, there were times when I was just crying, but I knew that God was there with me. And it wasn't even like a, stop crying, it's going to be okay. It was just kind of like, I'm just going to sit with you while you weep. Yeah, but if I'm being really honest, I also I ran to the wrong things too. I think grief, I was talking to Sarah, I think grief is, sometimes it can feel like you're drowning, and then anyone that hands you a lifeline, you kind of grab hold of it. And so I think I definitely ran to the wrong places around that time too.
Yeah. Which we look for things to help us. I think that's such a great picture of just looking for the lifeline when you're drowning. You'll reach to whoever is giving you the closest hand, basically, or the dinghy or whatever they throw out.
Yeah.
So I think that's just a real part of when you're grieving and in pain too. It can sometimes completely cloud our usual character judgments. Like it's almost, yeah, it's debilitating sometimes. Sarah, how about you in terms of family, community? Did that have an impact on you? Did you lose friends through it? What was that like?
Yes, I think my story was it was a hard one because I'd never met anyone who dealt with what I'd been through. And so like I think I pushed people out, people who wanted to help me, because I just felt almost as if like you love on me the best way you know how, but it's not necessarily what I need right now. And you never want to push people who love you away. But unfortunately I did, because I had to be selfish in that moment because I couldn't care about other people's feelings. But in that time, you know, I would say the real ones stayed. They understood that there's no rule book to this. Literally no rule book to this. And God also blessed me with some new people that I didn't expect, but now I can literally call them like my best of friends, which was amazing. And church was big, but I also had to get counseling. Like I remember I went to a retreat, and one of the ladies there, like she was a friend of a friend, but we were cool, you know. And she just said, "God's laid on my heart to pay for you for your first 3 sessions of counseling." And I just burst into tears because at that point as well, I'm recovering from the wedding. I was made redundant from work. So I just got into a new job. Like I did not have money for counseling. I knew I needed it, but it just wasn't the top of my priority list. And so her doing that, literally, I would say, saved me in so many ways. And it helped me to stop pushing people out and even run into the wrong things. It was interesting because I remember just sitting there one day and thinking, like, surely there must be like more to my life than this heartbreak, right? Because everyone's life just keeps going on, but yours is just stopped. Like you have a moment of freedom where you're not at work or you're not at church and you're just left with your thoughts. So I tried to do things like, you know, I couldn't swim, so I learned how to swim, you know. But then I'll be honest, I just started eating. I literally was like, I would come for eat, then I would stop eating. Like it was so dramatic. Like I lost like a stone in the space of 2 weeks, and a stone is a lot of weight, right? And then like I'll just eat again. And unfortunately, that caused health issues. Like, we can be real here, right? I didn't have a period for 12 months because this level of stress that it caused me, my hair was falling out. There was just so much. And that, for me, was a reminder that you heal so well when you are in community. Because my community, I feel like I'm getting emotional, my community literally held on to me when I just felt like every part of my life was deteriorating.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think even just you saying about the impact on your body, and you were saying, Jennifer, about the first time you'd had a panic attack, the impact of trauma on the body is real. And even when emotionally sometimes we're working through, even if we've not fully worked through or not fully healed, sometimes the physical symptoms of trauma can carry on. It's so, yeah, we can be real. It's such a big thing. Jennifer, you've obviously talked to how difficult it was being in faith community at that time. Have you found that again? Did it kind of move past a time where you've been able to just find a bit of security again in friendships or in a faith community? Did that season pass? It's probably a bit, I know it's probably a difficult question for you to answer.
Yeah.
Because I'm hearing, like, for Sarah, that was so big, and you literally had a very different experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what I did was I actually joined, like I said, I kind of grabbed onto whatever was there, other people that were offering to be my covering at the time. And unfortunately, and we're all humans, so we all go through stuff. Unfortunately, the person that was offering that covering at the time was dealing with issues and was basically opened up to me that he was having multiple affairs, wanted me to be like the 11th. And that was probably the thing that made me be like, I can't do this. I think that was the bit that probably took me over the edge, because in running towards what I was trying to find safety, it was like, this is not safe. And I think that thing, I was full of so much disappointment and despair. I actually was like, I'm going to destroy everyone that comes near me unless I destroy myself. So it led me to depression. It led me to attempting suicide. And to be honest, any talk of church or pastors was a trigger for me. It was a trigger for me. It was just like, I was like, God, I love you, but these men of God aren't necessarily good men. Now I have been on a healing journey since then. And I think I'm still navigating my way towards the whole church community. I think what I've realized is, instead of me trying to search for a load of people of God, I find God in people. Like, there's a lot of people that I've met where I'm just like, wow, like really full of love. But my whole dream of being in a safe church community, I haven't necessarily, and I think it's a beautiful thing. I do want to mention, I think being planted in a church community is beautiful. And I think it's a place where you can flourish. I just am still on that journey.
Working through that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I appreciate your honesty with that too. In terms of your faith, has walking through this redefined your faith in any way? So positively or negatively? Has it challenged thoughts you'd had before? Have you grown through it? So in terms of your faith, rather than just being connected to a church, but you and God.
I think it made it deeper. I think it's deepened my faith, because I think sometimes we can be like, oh, I'm a Christian and I go to church and everything. But actually, it's made me really search God. Like, when you're stripped of everything, you realize if God is my everything, actually, they can't take anything.
Yeah.
And I think that I've realized we're really all just walking each other home. Like, heaven is home. People are not homes. And we try to make homes out of people, right? But then when you make a house out of someone, the minute you start to grow or the minute things change, it feels like instability. Whereas if you can realize that these people are walking partners, then there's a lot more grace. And I think that's been a big part, is like, actually, God is my everything. Heaven is home. and the people that I get to walk on this journey with, it's a blessing, but I don't expect them to be God. And that ache that I have is for a love that I can actually only find in him. Yeah.
Sarah, what about you in your faith? Like, has walking through this serious breakup redefined it in any way, strengthened it, deepened it?
Absolutely strengthened it. So similar to what you said, Jennifer. I think you don't expect it to. Like, you don't expect it to make you trust God more or like love God more. But when God is literally your only lifeline, you realize that actually, like, you're all I've got. Everyone else is a bonus. They're an addition to you, right? And so I think it definitely made me trust him a lot more, but also trust him in me. You know, trust him in that I have him in me so I can make decisions, because I was so scared to make decisions. I was so scared to do anything, think anything. I found myself trying to find confirmation through people a lot because I had a 6-year relationship that didn't work out. So clearly I can't make good decisions.
You struggle to trust your own judgment.
Yeah. So when people come to me for advice, I look at them thinking, like, have you like missed the chapter of my life? But then it just shows you that we are so quick to make like breakups or relationships the only part of our lives when there's so much more. And so, yeah, like God just showed me so much love in a way that I'm so bold about it now. So even speaking about this now, even when I was crying before, it wasn't from a place of pain or anything, but just thinking about, wow, like, I have amazing friends. I have a community that I actually look at them and I see the reflection of God. Like, that is, for me, life-changing, and that would never stop shocking me. So yeah, it definitely increased my faith.
Before, Sarah, you were talking about things in your past that you've run from. And maybe sometimes we look for in a relationship the opposite of what we've had before. So going into your relationship, what was it you were looking for? And then have you found it on the other side of it ending? Or how did you find it on the other side of it ending?
So one of the things, I wanted someone who was going to be really faithful to me. And like, I absolutely adore my parents, right? But I witnessed infidelity. So, and I just remember thinking at the age of 16, yeah, that can never be me. Like, yeah. And so when I met someone who loved God more than he loved me, and, you know, he'd also experienced that in his family and saw what it did in his family, you know, that was one of his big things. Like, I would rather leave than cheat. So that was like massive for me. Another thing for me is like, I've always been like plus size. And because of that, you know how society is. You kind of think, oh gosh, if I don't look a certain way or dress a certain way, then I'm never going to find someone unless they are just completely opposite to what I want. And he wasn't opposite to what I wanted. Like, he was tall. Was he still alive? He is tall, dark, handsome, beard. Like, he ticked all of these boxes, and like, you weren't overlooking me. So, you know, when I got into that relationship, those things like infidelity or, you know, the size I am or anything like that just wasn't an issue. And while in the relationship, actually, I lost a lot of weight. So I look completely different to what I look like now. I'm cute now, though, but, you know, I look completely different to what I look like now. I lost so much weight. And so then I started to think, actually, like, was it because of my weight loss, drastic weight loss? And then I would ask him questions like, oh, it's because I've lost a lot of weight. And they'd be like, no, I like it. And then I start thinking, oh, okay, maybe it's because I'm putting on weight again. Like, it just this massive thing. And if I'm being honest with you, my body image was not an issue for him. So I'm not going to sit here and say he made me insecure in that way. But when I came out of the relationship, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to go through this all again. And then I had to go through a thing where I loved myself from the inside out. Like, if you follow me, if you know me, like, I'm such a healthy body image advocate. I'm like, if you want to lose weight, but don't lose it because someone's telling you you're fat. Like, lose it because you want to be healthy, right? And if you want a healthy relationship, find someone who values, like, values fidelity, values God. Don't just go into a relationship with someone because he's not going to cheat, because he can do other things that make you feel rubbish, right? So a big thing for me was really going on that journey of actually loving myself and realizing that my parents' story, my auntie's story, my uncle's story, that's not my story. Like, I'm Sarah, I'm not them. So those are two massive things that I had to do. And that's why I say I'm in a much healthier place now when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Jennifer, how about you? Were there things that you were maybe looking for in your relationship, as we all do, but then you actually found it on the other side?
Yeah, I think it's so funny because when I look back now, I can really see that I was really looking for God. I was looking for stability. I was looking for something that was constant. So when I met my ex-husband, he represented kind of all of those things. And it's so funny because I do think when I look back on all my relationships, a lot of the time I was searching for something in other people that I really needed to find in myself. And so I think I found those things on the other side and realized I don't have to look for them in other people. Yeah.
And then I think just moving on to the healing journey, which we know is non-linear, and we're not going to try and attach a timeline to it. Could you just give us some headlines of what that's been like, and we can kind of delve deeper into that, Sarah?
Yeah.
We'll start with you.
The biggest thing for me is I had to forgive. Like, I had to forgive. And forgiveness wasn't just him. It wasn't just his parents, but I forgive myself. Like, I had to really forgive myself. And that made it easier for me to believe I actually deserve to heal. Because that's another thing. Like, sometimes you feel like, well, this is it now. So, like, just move on. This is your life. And that's okay. But when I accepted that, no, I deserve to be whole, I deserve to heal, I realized I had to forgive in order to make the right steps. Because if not, I would just keep punishing people for the mistakes that he made, that I made, that everyone else made. And I didn't want to be nasty. I didn't want... I'm quite self-aware, so I know I would have certain conversations and there were certain trigger points, so I would just be vile to be around. And I didn't want that for me, because this has already affected one part of my life. I don't want it to affect every other part of my life. So healing is also a choice. Like, you have to decide, like, I'm ready to get over this now. And that is also really hard. So those are two headlines, like choosing to heal and forgiveness.
Yeah. And someone once said to me that forgiveness is like a flow and it's a choice.
Yeah.
So quite often we think, well, I feel in a place ready to forgive.
Yeah.
But other times I'm not convinced we ever really come to the place where we feel like we want to forgive.
Yeah.
What was that like for you practically? How did you go on a journey of forgiveness? Because I'm pretty sure that wasn't just moving upwards in the same direction.
It was not moving up in the same direction. Far from. There was a lot of practical steps to it. So, like, there was some moments where it was quite, but it was, I remember one thing for his mum, because we had such a good relationship before it went bad. And I just, for the life of me, I didn't care about her anymore. I just didn't want to hear her name. And I was like, this is literally killing you. And I found out she was unwell. And I didn't feel anything. And I didn't ever think that I would hear his mum was unwell and I wouldn't feel anything. And it was his sister who told me. And I remember, like, the Holy Spirit just saying to me, call her. Like, just call her. And I was like, I'm not calling her. And then I called her and she was like, oh, my angel. In my head I thought, angel? What? But she said that. And then when we spoke, I was like, you actually don't hate this woman. You don't dislike this woman. Like, that's her son, right? She did whatever she felt like she needed to do. And in that example, it was the phone call. With him, it was realizing that he is a broken person. I'm a broken person. Like, what he did was wrong and I'm not going to justify it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, right? But it's accepting that I can't change that. And so I just had to, I spoke a bit at the beginning around, like, everything that went on around the annulment. That made me feel like I took a couple of steps backwards, where I'd really healed you, but then you're doing all of these things to make me think that you hate me. But he wasn't doing that out of a place of hate. He was doing it out of a place of desperation and actually out of a place of love. And just because the way he does things is completely different to how I think I should do things with anyone else, does not mean that he is a bad person. Like, we had a lot of good years. So I didn't ever feel like it, but I knew I had to. And I think the love that I had for these people that I eventually had to forgive, like, when I really tapped into it, was way more than any other emotion.
Yeah.
Which did make it a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's good. And for you, Jennifer, where did your can you kind of pinpoint where your healing journey began? Like, was there a moment where you kind of like, things are moving in a little bit of a different direction now for good?
Yeah, definitely. And I think like Sarah said, it isn't just him to forgive. It was like all of the people around it that didn't know what to do, all of the people that took advantage. It was like a lot of just forgiveness and forgiving myself. But I do remember there was a moment because I was like, I had so much rage. And I think there was a moment where I just broke down, and I could see all these people. It's like I could see them through God's eyes. Like, oh my gosh, these people are all children of God. They're not villains. They're not enemies. They're not monsters. Yes, it hurts. Yes, some of them disappointed me. Some of them, it was my expectations of them that actually disappointed me. But actually, they're all God's children. And I think every time that I'm tempted, because it is a journey, right? Every time I'm tempted to feel bitter, or I find my inner dialogue being like, it's like, I just say that prayer. I'm like, God, help me to see them through your eyes. And it's really amazing how much easier it is to forgive when you can see someone through that soul lens, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What about timelines? Because I think you mentioned this before about we can't really put a timeline on how long it takes to heal. But I think quite often there can be shame or secrecy even attached to that, because maybe a few years down the line, sometimes you feel pain again, or you feel angry again, or you feel, it's not that you've not healed, there's been a process of healing, but something still hurts. What would you say, first of all, Sarah, around just timelines and healing and what we expect?
Yeah.
I should be here by now. Why am I not here? I should have grieved by now. I should have moved on by now.
I think, like, if I was to say anything to anyone, just scrap timelines out of your mind. Like, they are fake, because for me, actually, I remember getting back into the whole dating pool, right? And there were certain things that triggered me, and I would like get so angry, like, oh God, but I thought I'd moved on. Like, I thought I was healed. Like 3 years later, why am I still here? But I wasn't still here. It was just a trigger that hadn't been tapped yet. And so healing is an ongoing process, because until someone touches an area, you won't know if you still need to do a little bit of work in that place. Doesn't mean you still love the person. It doesn't mean you're still, in that space. It just means that you are on a journey to being a better person, which I think is really important. And some things some things are really quick as well. And then people make you feel as if maybe you didn't love the person, or you didn't, because, 6 months later, she's smiling and she's happy, she's back serving in church, and, like 6 months, 6-year relationship. Like, things happen at different times for different people. So the worst thing you can do is look at someone else and say, well, this person was fine after a year and they actually even got remarried. So why am I not there? We're all on our own journey. And you have to respect your journey in order to get the best results.
Yeah. Jennifer, what has that timeline thing been like for you?
I think what Sarah said is so important. You really have to respect the time that it takes to heal. I think it's so funny because once I had an operation and I was so like, nothing can stop me. So like straight after the operation, I remember like going straight back into work, and then someone came and picked me up at work, and it was like split my stitches and made me like sick. But that kind of really reminds me of the healing process, is that like when you've just had an operation, or if you've broken your leg, like you do need time to heal. And even though people are like, oh, well, time heals, but if you're walking on it already, it's going to take longer to heal, and it might even heal wonky. You might have to go and have another operation to sort it out. So I think for me, and this has been quite a recent discovery, is that actually me trying to operate and trying to heal in my own strength and trying to mask everything and pretend it's okay has actually made the process take longer. And what we said earlier about kind of like, grief is like, feels sometimes like you're drowning. I'm learning to float. I'm learning the art of the float, where actually when I look up and trust in him, I can actually just rest. And I think there's definitely something in being still, just being still, knowing he's God. Let the current of his love take you where you need to go instead of trying to kick against the goad and trying to say, this is where I need to go. This is how my healing journey needs to look. I need to be healed in 2 years, married with 3 kids by this time. Deadlines are deadly. Like, I really do believe that, trust. And sometimes trust looks like true rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced, you say the thing about time as a healer. Obviously, clearly, time alone cannot heal. But what have you both found? Has time given you different perspective? Is it just kind of like, no? Is time a healer in some ways or not?
See, it's such a great saying with great sentiments and everything, but time alone is not a healer. Like, you need time to heal, yes, but time alone is not a healer. That's why you see people who, for lack of a better phrase or terminology or whatever, they still smell of what they've been through. Like, because 10 years have gone past and it's like nothing's changed. And I think, healing is so intentional. And I always use an analogy, like when you get like a scab, and similar to what you say, if you keep scratching the scab and peeling it, it's going to keep bleeding. Like, it's just going to keep bleeding. Eventually you have to leave it to heal. The wound is still there. Like, you'll have a scar. Like, I have a scar on my finger that's never going away. And the scar is a reminder of what you've been through, right? So it doesn't just go away. And the scar doesn't also go away with time. It's still there. But what happens is you stop bleeding. So time is this beautiful concept. But I think what we should really say is what you do with the time while you're healing. That's what matters. Because time can pass you by. Like, everyone's life will keep going. But what you're doing in that time will determine whether you heal or not.
What do you think about that, Jennifer? Like, in your experience,
Yeah.
has time been part of your healing? Are you just like, no, it's what Sarah said, it's what you've done with the time that's been significant?
Yeah, it's definitely what you do with the time. And forgiveness, I know we mentioned it, but it is literally like the antibiotic that stops that wound getting infected.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes if you don't forgive, then actually time can make that bitterness turn into something quite ugly. It can turn into an infection, literally. So I think forgiveness. I also think that you grow. I think you have to keep growing, because sometimes the grief doesn't get smaller. Sometimes you grow bigger to be able to kind of consume it. And I think that's definitely been my experience. I wouldn't necessarily say the pain got smaller, but I would say I've grown new depths. I've grown to kind of like where it becomes a smaller part of me, even though the pain's not necessarily smaller, if that makes sense.
Yeah, your ability to walk with it, carry it, and see it in the light of
and to keep giving it to God as well.
Yeah. And just forgiveness for you as well, Jennifer. That journey, how did you just practically begin with that? Because I think for most of us, especially as women of faith, we know we might not always want to forgive, but we know the right thing is to forgive. But then I think sometimes it's hard to know where to begin when there's so many layers of unforgiveness, so many layers of grief, sadness, rage, rejection, all the things we've spoken about. Where did it begin for you? How did you practically just take that first step? I'm going to choose this journey of forgiveness.
It sounds mad, but practically I wrote him letters. Wrote him letters that he'll probably never see because we don't talk anymore. And in those letters, I kept forgiving and apologized and repented. And and those letters ended up actually becoming poems. And so practically writing is like therapy for me. So I think that really helped, is just being able to actually on paper write, I forgive you. Yeah.
And just thinking ahead, I don't know if either of you are looking to like settle down maybe in the future, I don't know. But if you are, what are some of your hesitations maybe or anxieties around that, if we can just be completely real? You've been through some really tough things, but you're healing and in the process of healing, which is beautiful to see. But do you feel like you carry any hesitation around that, anxiety? Do you feel like, no, I've moved, that was one part of my life? I think you were saying we can make failed relationships our story. And it's kind of like, no, it's a part of our story. Where do you sit with that, Sarah?
I think now I'm like, yeah, I'm in a much better place. But I think one thing that I realized is like people change. People literally change. I change. We evolve. And my biggest fear was, what if we don't evolve together? Because that's what happened in my previous relationship. And I've actually been in a relationship after that happened, and it was we were together for a while, and then we broke up. And I just felt heartbreak all over again, and it was quite abrupt. And I started thinking, oh gosh, maybe it's me, you know. But actually, that relationship, I can't even fault it. We just shouldn't have been together. Like, he's a great guy, you know, all of that good positive stuff. But in that relationship, he actually taught me that you have to be willing to trust the process, and if you have faith in God, then that's the most important thing, because faith in people will actually disappoint you. I'm not saying you shouldn't like expect, to a certain extent, healthy relationships and all of that stuff. But actually, when you have faith in God, it means that even if it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the road. And you just have to hope that the lessons you've learned from your previous relationships and stuff, like it carries through. But yeah, I was definitely anxious to give someone my heart again. I remember even saying, I'm never going to love anyone like I loved him. Like, I'm just not going to do that to myself. And that is completely the wrong thing to do. And I know that now because, you know, I like to think I'm a great person, you know, with all humility, and someone deserves that, because I want you to give me everything of you, like, right? So I need to do the same. I can't hold back, because again, I'll be punishing you for what someone else has done, which just isn't fair. But I was definitely anxious, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you, Jennifer? Where does that like land with you?
It's so funny because I feel like it's only been recently that I've been like, oh, I'm excited for that. I think, I mean, I feel like I have a lot more depth, and I feel like I really do listen to that inner voice. Like, I feel like if prayer is you calling God, intuition is like God calling you sometimes, right? So it's really hard to gaslight me now. It's really hard to manipulate me. But yeah, I think I'm excited about that. I think the anxieties have been, I don't know how you found it, but I felt like being really real, I feel like the dating pool is slightly contaminated.
Yeah.
Slightly is an understatement. I think we agree with that.
Yeah. So I feel like I think there's a lot of men that haven't seen divine masculine and are looking to be mothered. I think there's a lot of women that have fallen into the illusion to settle for being looked at rather than being seen.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
Yeah, and I think that to me is probably more important. It's not so much about being loved, it's about being seen. And if someone's willing to do that deep dive, then there's new depth to me now. So I feel like I can't settle for the shallow relationships. If it happens, it happens. I'm not looking for it, but I'm open to it.
And just being completely honest as well, as women, you know, in our 30s, sometimes wanting to settle down and have children is part of our desire too. And I think you right, Jennifer, you can feel like the dating pool's a bit contaminated, or maybe there's a few red flags in there. But it can be quite tempting to want to settle down quickly because we've got a biological clock as well. And we're kind of aware that's part of our age. That's just part of where we're at. How do you kind of resist that temptation as well, just to run into something new because of the timeline thing again? That's really real. And for a lot of women is a struggle because they want to settle with the right person, but then at the same time want the family and maybe a bit nervous and anxious about how long that might take.
So like I said, I think I've had the benefit of, I could have gone back and I didn't. And I always say to myself, if I didn't settle 7 years ago, I'm not going to settle now. Like, then I should have just gone back then. It is really, really hard. And I think the older I get, you know, the more conversations I'm having with my single friends who are also in their 30s, like, you know, I want to freeze my eggs, I want to do this, I want to do that. And I remember just having to kind of step back from all of those conversations because it was putting a lot of pressure on me, like so much pressure. I'm like, hey, like, and I don't want to just be in a relationship for being in a relationship's sake. I do not want to just marry someone because I want to procreate. Like, that's not it. I want to be with someone because, this is someone I want to do life with, I want to do destiny with, I want to do kingdom with. Like, I'm all about kingdom marriages, right? And so if I allow the pressure of my biological clock, which is ticking and I can't deny it, right, to get to me, then I will settle. So I had to choose what I wanted more, like a healthy and wholesome relationship, or, all of the like perks without the actual benefit itself. Like, and I just chose that I wanted a healthy, wholesome relationship, and in the right time, it will happen, and God will bless me with the kids that I want. Like, I've got people in my family who start having kids in their 40s. I mean, I don't want that, but it's just a reminder that it can happen. So, yeah. But it's hard. I'm not going to sit here and try and be like overly spiritual about it. But I think my desire to be in a healthy relationship and for me to be happy as well, like, far outweighs that.
So it gives you peace, because that's
It gives
greater
you so
than
much peace. Yeah.
Yeah.
So much peace. And I'm Nigerian, so I get it all the time. So, get the calls, get the messages, get the matchmaking, and I'm like, leave me alone. So I just silence the noise.
Yeah. Jennifer, what about you? Like, is that the same with you? You just know so much what you want that's the leading edge now, or
I have no idea what I want.
Okay.
For the first time ever, I've always been so like ambitious and be like, this is my 10-year plan. I'm like, God knows the desires of my heart. And he says, delight yourself in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. He didn't say, I'll give you the plans that you made. So I think I'm just really, for the very first time, in a place of this sweet surrender where I'm doing the float and I'm so expectant of his miracles, however that looks. And I've unsubscribed to this expiry date. I think, first of all, my God's the God of miracles. The fact that I'm even here and I'm alive is a miracle. Therefore, if he wants to birth life through me, which is a miracle in itself, then amazing. Do I feel entitled to anything? No. Do I think that if that doesn't happen, that I have no value? No. I was in an industry for a long time that also had an expiry date on women. I've unsubscribed to that too. I'm like, honestly, the things that God wants to create through me and birth through me, he'll do in its right time and he'll make everything beautiful in its time.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
And so for perhaps women who are where you were, so at the point of heartbreak and just feeling it's the end, there's no hope. What would you offer? What would you say? If there's anything that can be said, like, what would you have wanted somebody to say to you at that point?
I think I read something somewhere recently that really touched me. And it's about, I don't know if you know about the giant sequoias. They're giant trees. I think they live for like 3,000 years. They're regal, but they can only germinate in forest fires. In really intense heat is when they actually release their seeds so that it can grow. So I think to anyone that feels like their whole entire world has just fallen apart, which mine did, sometimes it takes a forest fire for giant things to really grow. And sometimes it might feel like you're being stripped back of everything. But sometimes that's when the most beautiful things happen. I think the worst thing that happens to you can sometimes be the best thing that's ever happened to you if you allow God to bring out the best in you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, what about you? What would you say?
I mean, that was literally so beautiful that I don't even know what to say to add to that. Like, honestly. And I think the biggest thing for me was that it was only a chapter of my life. It wasn't my whole life. It wasn't my future. It's definitely my past. It currently was, at the time, was my present, but it was only a chapter. And because it was only a chapter, it means that there are so many more chapters that God is still writing. There are so many more chapters that he's using me to write. And so if you are going through this right now, you may feel hopeless. You may have thoughts like, the world doesn't need you here, because you know, one of the lies of the enemy is that your worth is tied into the things that has tried to break you. You do need to be here. There's so much more. And you may actually be in a position where God will use your story to bless other people, but also to bless you. And I was saying this before, you were saying before about writing. Writing for me was so therapeutic. It was so healing. Write things down. You know, write things down when you feel like you can't speak to anyone about it. I actually wrote so much that I wrote a book, and that book has blessed people. And I say that to say that even if that book never was published or no one ever read it, it blessed me. I remember reading it one day and thinking, wow, like I'm in a much better place now. I'm still not there, but here I couldn't even get out of bed. But at least now I'm out of bed, I'm going out, you know, so trust the process and celebrate yourself for every win. And just because you have some down days, it doesn't mean it's a setback. It's all a part of the healing process. Like, you're going to look back at this day, if you allow the process to happen, and you're going to say, wow, I actually overcame that. And what literally the enemy meant for evil, God turned it around for my good. And that's what I'd say.
So in terms of the plan you had for your life, and perhaps at the point, maybe before you were getting married, you envisioned your life with your husband. That's obviously completely different now. How have you reconciled what that is and now what your present reality is?
Yeah, I was so jealous of the plans that I had. Like, you know, when like you're not there, but you're so jealous of like the fact that you're not a wife and you're not a mum. And, you know, if you're not careful, what happens is everyone else in your life who's experiencing that, you can start looking at them a bit enviously, not intentionally, like you're happy for them, but because you know that you, in your mind, was supposed to be there. But then what I realized is that life doesn't just happen. And wherever I am now is exactly where I'm supposed to be. And so I had to be okay with the fact that that season of my life had ended, but it doesn't mean that what I envisioned won't happen. Like, this is part of our faith, it's hope, right? So I was hopeful that not only will it happen, but it will be better, and it'll be with the right person at the right time. So you can have like a fairy tale in your mind of what you want and how it will be. And the fairy tale doesn't have to die because the relationship does. It's just really about, you know, being expectant for it to come in the future. So that for me was a big breakthrough.
Yeah. How about you, Jennifer? How have you reconciled what you'd expected, what you'd hoped for, and your present reality?
I grieved it. I grieved my dreams. I grieved the version of myself, grieved the potential. I think it's also freed me, though, because like we were saying, when you have a whole plan, I felt like I was in the pilot seat. I don't really know how to fly a plane. I just kind of had some idea of like where I was going. And I think for the first time, and this has been a really recent discovery, is God's actually the pilot. And he didn't say there wouldn't be any turbulence. He didn't say it was going to be a fairy tale. But I really do trust the pilot. And I really believe that it's going to be beautiful. And so I'm excited to see his plans, I think, now. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been so incredible to hear both of your stories. I'm so grateful that we've been able to have this conversation. And I think my kind of big takeaway from it is, even in the midst of pain and grief, there can still be hope as well. There can still be healing. I think what you said, Jennifer, about growing and becoming bigger to carry the pain doesn't always get less. The scars are real, the wounds are real sometimes. But actually, when we invite God into that space, there can also be restoration and hope, even when we don't have all the answers. So thank you so much, Sarah and Jennifer, for sharing. It's been so good.
Thank you.